ochelliEffect is sponsored by WallStreetWindow.com and listeners like you.
And now, the most underrated voice in all media, Chuck Ochelli.
December 30, 2021, allegedly, according to that thing we call a calendar. And this indeed is the show you were looking for on a Thursday, if indeed you're hearing it live. But most of you do catch it further on down the stream via your fondle slab of choice, your applicable application. And I welcome you no matter who you are, where you are, or when you are. Anyway, second to last day on that calendar here in what used to be America, but it's actually the next day for our friends in Oceania, over there on the other side of the, is it a globe, is it not? I don't want to have that argument tonight, do you? I don't.
No.
Anyway, I'm not doing that one today. We do have to go through something, and I did invite our friend we called him, Carl, back to the show tonight. And I'm glad I did, because he started talking about something that there was no way we were going to cover in the limited amount of time we had last night. It was just impossible. And really, it's going to be impossible to cover it today. Okay? But we may get a strong introduction. And Carl started talking about, what? The Magna Carta. And how this applies. And all of a sudden, we were engaged in a discussion about natural law. And I said, I didn't expect this. I wouldn't have spent so much time talking about the chicanery of the powers that should not be, okay, in a lot of places, and what it is they're doing, had I been able to talk about something productive and solution-oriented regarding this. I mean, I know I got to cover both, but, it's a need to go into the rare information regarding the natural rights of the individuals, the men and women that are upon the land in a lot of places. Why am I carefully choosing these words? Well, because as we started talking about last night, words have definite meanings as well, though they have been changed and revised over time. Still, there are things that remain the same. And what is one of my favorite phrases when we start talking about this? I start talking about, the American Constitution, because it's the document that I'm the most familiar with. And I start saying things like, although these rights are on that piece of paper, they do not come from that piece of paper. What do I say? By virtue of your creation. And again, another argument I'm not going to get into. You want to talk to me about which God created you? I don't want to hear it. You want to talk to me about you just got here because your parents happened to get friendly? That's fine. By virtue of your creation, okay, you are literally endowed with certain rights. That is the way the world should work. So with that, I'm going to turn my show over to Carl, and he has brought the gentleman that he mentioned last night, who said, if you recall, if you heard the show from last night, Carl said, there was a guy that I had 4 questions for, and I spent 5 hours discussing them regarding this particular concept, the heart of the reality that should be our reality, as far as I'm concerned. Sounds like I'm doing a lot of doublespeak here, Carl, but I'm not trying to.
No, I know, Chuck. This isn't an easy subject, and I'm so pleased that you use the words describing what we're going to do today as solution-orientated, because that's why I'm involved. I'm not involved because I want to go and stand up and protest or set a car on fire or smash a window. I'm involved because I want to help find a solution for all of us. Now, that means Australians, that means Americans, that means everybody, because we are all the same. We are all humans. We are all born endowed with natural rights that have, until very recently, I've discovered, been hidden from us. And the bloke that was able to help me find just how hidden these things are, and believe me, I'm only at the very end, or very beginning of this road, is Fitzroy Sterling. And Fitz, thanks for joining us. I couldn't do this without you. I don't have the recall yet that you do, and certainly as discussions we've had together prove, this isn't an easy topic to get your head around, and it will make people's heads spin today.
Thanks for inviting me, guys. So it's a pleasure to be here.
So, Fitz, where is the best starting point, do we feel, for people who have heard the name Magna Carta but don't quite understand that there might be 1 to 5 different versions of it? We today are going to be specifically speaking about one version.
Yeah, so my starting point is always at the centre, and the centre is the word law. So we need to have a really clear definition of what law is, because if we don't have that clear definition, we're going to get confused with rules and legislation and the legal system, believing they're all versions of law. And so I really like to start with law, because I can see that that's the beginning of the whole, of how that's all going to connect to our inalienable rights.
So let's go through our first slide, and folks, you'll be able to get this visual thing later. The first slide, law, an existing condition that is both binding and immutable, exists both in the present and in perpetuity. That means permanently across all realms. Let's break that down a bit.
All right, so this is a tough one if you've never heard this before. So we've got to think about what a realm is. So we know what the physical realm is, that most people would identify with that. That's through the access of your senses, right? So that's your sight, touch, smell, taste, and hearing. So most of us experience the physical realm through those 5 senses. Then we sort of realms we don't think about are our mental realm. So the mental realm is obviously, before you manifest anything into the physical realm, you need to have a thought first. And so that's where all this action happens.
Right.
And so when something exists in perpetuity, you're still bound by it in the mental realm as well as you are in the physical realm, as well as the spiritual realm. So those realms, natural law binds you across all those ones. And so law is to do with that. Anything that's law has to have a permanency to it that is out of your control. So we didn't create ourselves. So we don't have the level of intelligence to create the microbiome that live inside us. Every single cell, how it's going to interact with each other. We didn't design our faces. We didn't design the earth that we live on, how the soil, nurtures whatever's inside it. We didn't design any of that, right? So this is beyond our control. So if you can understand law as something that's beyond our control, yet we are bound by it. So we don't get to choose. Regardless of our opinion, the same thing's going to happen. So if you think about the laws of physics, for example, if you're driving in a car at 100 kilometers an hour and you decide to take a hard turn, you might believe that the car is going to take a smooth turn. What you're going to discover is the laws of physics, and it's going to be quite brutal, because that car isn't going to turn. It's going to start rolling in the same direction it was heading before you turn the steering wheel. So that's something we don't get to choose. It will just happen. So that's what's always going to happen. No matter how many times you do that action, it's always going to be the same. So that's a quick way to understand what law is. It's something that will always repeat itself. It's a constant, and it cannot be changed regardless of your opinion.
So natural law would cover that scenario too, you would think?
Yeah, so hopefully you've got a slide for that as well.
Yes.
You'll be able to bring that up, and that pretty much is a repeat of what I've just said.
All right, let me read that slide. The system of dynamics of natural law is built into the universe that are binding and permanent, a body of universal spiritual laws that act as the governing dynamics of consciousness.
Yes, so...
that's a big statement.
Hopefully it's clear. I'm just trying to think what part I can elaborate on. So if you think about how we don't choose whether we have feelings or not, you didn't get to choose the feelings that that come endowed inside you. You didn't get to choose that.
Sure.
I didn't either, but they're always the same ones. We all have the same. That's what's permanent about us. And our feelings are really basically like the red light on the dash. When something's in alignment or when an action is in alignment with, the laws of nature, or it's actually contributing to them, we'll get positive feelings like joy, elation, euphoria. We'll get those feelings, right? So the reason why we have those feelings is because it's telling us that this is something, we want to repeat again.
Sure.
And then when actions happen outside of that work against the laws of nature, that don't contribute to the, in the service of life or in the enrichment of life, then we have feelings like bitterness, resentment, animosity, rage, those things. And they're sort of telling us, they're like a motivator to tell us that, if we're having these feelings and they're really unpleasant, then they're motivating us to do something about it, which is going to get us into that other stage where we're getting those feelings that we find pleasant. If that's kind of a quick way to explain it. So this doesn't change. It's always the same. And so that's kind of a quick way to explain natural law. It's like out of our control. It's permanently there. It's there before we were created. It's always been there, and it doesn't care about your opinion. So the thing about your opinion is that that's usually something to do with your own personal preferences, or your personal biases or prejudices. And those things can change. So, your beliefs are always something that is never permanent. It's changeable. Where when it comes to natural law, it's irrelevant of your personal preferences. It's always constant. So if you think in terms of something that's constant and permanent, that you don't have control over, that's really what law is. And then we've just subverted, the people who are in positions of power have subverted our consciousness to believe that law is something the government creates. And if you were to ask an overwhelming number of people, that's what they would believe law is.
So, Carl, one second here, because I just have a question. I want to personalize this. And I just want to see if I'm following correctly, because this very much is a parallel to my own philosophical understanding. Okay, and so I want to see if I'm on track with this. I have always explained this as a spiritual advisor on one level or another, as a minister, because I'm actually ordained in several faiths. Okay, I identify myself as a pagan, but here's the thing. The way to begin to understand this in my mind and to personalize it is to understand that you make no choice about your coming into this realm, this physical realm. This is not up to you, but you are subject to the conditions that are in that physical realm. So, life begins. This is not a choice that you personally made. None of us, as I said at the beginning, told our parents to get friendly. None of us told any of the gods, no matter which one it is or which set of them you believe are valid, quite frankly. We have no say in this. We are simply subject to this experience of life. Now, as for how it is we experience it, those things may vary, because we may have different sensory levels. We may have different intellectual capacities to observe what it is that we are experiencing as individuals. But at the moment that life begins, you are already subject to this circumstance that you're discussing here. Am I right or wrong about this?
Is this an answer for me or for a question?
Yeah, no, Fitz, you go.
This is for you, Fitz. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. In short, correct. It's a set of conditions that are pre-made where you had no saying, and you are just subject to, regardless if you like it or not. Absolutely.
Fair enough. No, I just wanted to be very clear about that. Okay, so go ahead, Carl. I did not mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to lay that there for the personalization.
It's important that we do get the questions, Chuck, because I have a very low level of assumed knowledge. Fitzroy has a much greater level of knowledge, and it's not assumed, I can assure you.
Mm-hmm.
And I no question about this is silly, or no person should think that a question they have is stupid about this. And we're going to get into the Magna Carta now, because that's where our rights are spoken about. Now, rights are something that we always say we have some understanding of. You know, we've got our rights, we've got our human rights. I've got my right to do this, and you've got no right to tell me to do otherwise. Do you actually understand the word rights? Do you know what the term rights means? Because until you fully appreciate and comprehend what rights you have, then you really don't know from what power you speak. You need to know what your rights are and understand what the word rights means. So we have the slide. We'll go back to the slides. And right now, rights is on the screen. The term rights is routed in knowledge of natural law. Rights are actions that protect all aspects of one's integrity. Hence, the right actions needed to preserve peace and harmonious coexistence of all life. So these rights, spoken about in the Magna Carta 1215, are not your right to walk across the street when you feel like it, or your right to paint your house blue when the rest of the town wants it red. These rights are your basic, real human rights that we're referring to. Am I right there, Fitz?
Yeah, so I just wanted to elaborate on a couple of things just to help the whole landing, of the information. So if we go to the word integrity, that's kind of coming from the word integer, and that's a mathematical term to mean whole number. And so integrity is about being whole. And how are we whole, right? It's when the four aspects of our integrity are all preserved and enriched. And they are the mental realm, the spiritual, the physical, and the emotional. So those four aspects of what make up our integrity. We have four different types of integrity. And so when we talk about actions need to respect all those four aspects, not one or two or three, but all four. And so anything that's to do with rights is to understand that if we are left in that space where we remain whole, where there's no violation to any one of those four aspects or all four of our integrity, then that is what is a preservation of a right. And so you can not be physically assaulted, right? However, you can experience some kind of emotional violation, you can experience a mental violation, and you can experience, what's the other one I'm missing? Spiritual violation, right? And if you think about what's happening today with this COVID stuff, that covers all four of them.
Absolutely.
But we don't talk about the three that we can't see. That's the problem. And those three are more important in a lot of ways than the last one, because they are the ones that lead to the physical violations. Before there's a physical violation, there's always a violation on the mental, emotional, and spiritual level, always. And very few people ever address that. But the whole way that legal system and that legislative structure runs, it's to violate you there first. And once it's done that, then that next one is just a natural outcome, the last one, which is the physical violation.
So what you're saying is this is, in fact, the seed for the mental health industry.
So not just that, but our spiritual and emotional health as well, like all those aspects. So the things you cannot see and touch, they're not things that you can actually, they're not tangible, but yet they are key aspects of ourselves. And so rights are to do with how we innately know how to live in peaceful coexistence. And if we're doing things that are violating one another, then there's no chance of peaceful coexistence. So when we speak of rights, it's just that innate knowledge we have of how to remain in peaceful, harmonious coexistence.
Okay, so I'd like to pause you for a second on that, because just for the record here, the majority of the audience that I'm sure will listen to what it is we are saying tonight is American. And quite frankly, although my audience is a bit smarter than the average, I will say that there will be people that will hear the word rights and immediately their minds will go to what we call the Bill of Rights here in the United States. Now, these are the first 10 parts of the Constitution, and it is interesting. It is interesting. It's an interesting document, but a lot of people, first of all, feel as though their rights are granted by, and notice I paused on that word, granted by this Constitution. And I have, for several years, had to have the discussion repeatedly that they are not granted by said Constitution. What is granted in that Constitution is more akin to privileges as opposed to rights, and rights are different from privileges. What do I mean by this? Our government has, at certain points, suspended those rights. Now, if we understand natural rights, these things are in, what was the term you used? Perpetuity.
Yeah.
They are not to be suspended, interrupted, aliened, not in any way. So here's the problem. That government piece of paper is just a piece of paper. Now, it's a fascinating one, and it does speak to a sum of the very same types of concepts you're talking about here, but it is it is not the same thing. And I've tried to have this discussion a lot of times, and maybe you could help me and listeners understand better the very difference between the natural right and these things which are ensconced, again, in what most people refer to as the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, although, again, the Bill of Rights is just the first 10 amendments, the first 10 rules, so to speak, in the Constitution, which are meant to be the most basic for American listeners. So, again, I'm not asking you to explain constitutional law, because, anyway, that's a whole joke in and of itself. By all means, could you help me sort of sort out what it is I'm getting to here, Mr. Fitzroy there?
Yeah, I'd love to. You're about to experience the biggest punch in the face you and the audience are ever going to have. So I'm not sure if you're bracing yourself.
Fair enough.
So get ready. Okay, so we need to understand what the word bill means. Do you have a concept of what the word bill means?
Well, I have a concept of a couple of different meanings for the word bill, but let's go for the most common use. It's usually something that shows a debt, actually, and is something that you pay. Okay. That would be the most basic use of the word when it comes to a bill.
I love that. And there's another word, another meaning, and that is it's an act of parliament. So when you see that term, a Bill of Rights, what they're actually telling you is that this is an act of parliament. And if you know what the word act means, it means to put on a theatre production. So basically what they're telling you, and most people never ever get this, and it took me a long time to understand this myself. And once I saw it, then I went, oh, now I get it. So this is a theatre production of parliament. That's what your Bill of Rights is. That's why you've never understood how the two can be the same. They're not.
Fair enough.
That's why I said you're about to get the biggest punch in the face. So this is one of the biggest deceptions that's ever happened. And you Americans are not going to like this because I know you guys hug your Constitution like it's part of your body. And you guys have been sucked in beyond belief, and that's why I said this is a massive punch in the face. So if we're talking about the Bill of Rights, the one that came from 1688 in the UK, what they did, it was an act of parliament that was deceptively written to include constitutional libertarian sentiments that sounded meritorious, like it sounded credible. And so the reason why they made it sound credible is because while you were looking over here, which you were seduced into looking into, because it was like, yeah, this is all fair income. Like, that's a word we use in Australia. It says it means credible. They took out the most powerful part, which is the part where if we are sovereign, which we need to go and give a definition of, which I'm hoping I'll do soon.
Yep.
Because sovereign means, the word sover means super, it means above. And the word reign is to rule. And so if we are sovereign, that means we are above the rule of anyone else. We as individual living beings. No one is our master.
Mm-hmm.
And so
you following, Chuck?
How do we make sure that the fictional creation that we created, we as living beings that exist in nature, that have a conscience, how do we make sure that fictional creation that we created doesn't ever give us privileges, doesn't ever give us our rights, so to speak. How do we make sure? We had a system called trial by jury and annulment by jury, where it was the people that were in courts. And courts of law require people to be in them, just general people of the that live in the community. There is no such thing as a judge. As soon as you have a judge in a court, it is not a court of law anymore. It's a court of legal, of Roman admiralty law, because the judge is someone appointed by the government. So how do you have an employee who's appointed by the government, who is meant to be working for us, decide on things to do with our freedoms? How does that even make sense? And this is what I'm saying is a massive punch in the face. So that Bill of Rights that you guys, hug and believe that this is now, where you get your freedoms from, they did that on purpose, because if they create the document, that means they get to change it. And if you say that you are those persons that they invented, if you claim to be them, that is how they control you. And that's the part where most people have no clue. They believe that lawyers are to do with matters of law. No, lawyers are to do with matters of legal. And legal is a fictional creation in the mind of man as a control structure to make us believe it's to do with law. So this is how badly our consciousness has been subverted. So I don't know which part I've lost you at there, Chuck. So you please ask me any questions, because I'm guessing there's a lot of things that are going to be coming up right now.
No, actually, I'm not lost at all. I fully understand the concept of the legal fictions and how it is we are summoned to court and all of this kind of thing, because we are not summoned to court. Our legal fiction is.
Yes,
and our legal fiction is brought there. How do I know this, by the way? Because, I don't know if they do this in Australia, but any American birth certificate I've ever seen, it's in all capital letters. Now, there are rules.
It's the same across the board.
Okay, fair enough. But there are rules in our language here, our common language. And one of those things that is a rule, which is why I jokingly do it sometimes in my show notes, is that something that is real cannot be spelled in all capital letters. Okay, this is one of those things. A real thing cannot be spelled this way. Okay, and there's a whole thing I could go into about why they use the word spelling and so on. But anyway, the thing is, though, you're called to court and you're asked to answer for this corporate entity, which you think shares a name with you. And this is the way it's done. It's very convoluted. I understand all this, and I do mean that I recognize the authority by which that it is being used, but don't necessarily agree with it in any way, shape, or form. And this is a huge difference between lawful and legal. And again, it's about another language being used also, and the fact is that this is a tough thing, and I don't clutch that Constitution like many of my fellow countrymen do. There are individuals that anytime you attempt to explain anything to them, will tell you, nope, my constitutional right, and I don't think they realize that they've already lost the argument once they do that.
Well, they've not only lost the argument, they've actually granted authority to the criminal enterprise that created it.
Yeah, precisely.
And that's going to be the really hard part, because this is generational.
Right.
This isn't just we were born into it. The parents before that, the parents before that, the parents before that. So this is all because you rely on your parents for survival. So whatever they teach you, you take as being, actually there for your protection. Mm-hmm. And so that's how bad this goes, because this is your emotional attachment, not yours personally, Chuck, but those people who, use the Constitution for their protection, they have an emotional attachment to this now. And emotions is how we get control. And that's what the whole, this whole structure, this Bill of Rights, was done for us to emotionally invest into this without really checking it over. Because if we don't know what the actual mechanism is that keeps us in charge of our government, then we have no power. So no matter what's written there, if we don't have a functional process by which to keep those that we elect into office in service of us, if we don't have a way to keep them accountable, then the whole system gets inverted and gets used against us. And that's what the purpose of the Bill of Rights was.
Right. Now,
And so if you think about it,
Mhm.
that's exactly what they've done here in Australia. They've done it in England. They've done it across the entire Commonwealth. And the USA used to be part of the Commonwealth.
no, and I recognize that that these terms are everywhere, and that this mechanism is everywhere. It's just that I very much have observed personally that it is here. I don't know all of the ins and outs. You know, in some other places, there are different structures. For instance, in Italy, you may have 3 judges as opposed to 1. You know, things like this. There are variations, and there are differences. So I don't necessarily believe that I know everything about how everything functions everywhere. I really don't. So that's why I say to you, look, I just know how it works here because I've seen it enough times. And this is a difficulty, too, with the use of the word sovereign. Just really quickly, because although you defined it perfectly, you gave it exactly the treatment it needs. You broke it down and explained that it is above reign. You can find it in the roots for where these words came from, which is fascinating because English is loaded with this. That which we call English, anyway, is loaded with this. Again, slight variations, different places. I mean, they use different terms in what they call the United Kingdom versus here. But the common language, the word sovereign would stand. Now, many people have misused this word. And so I urge anybody who hears that word and attaches it to something that they might have heard before to examine very carefully how it is being used. Your definition was very clear and concise, so I appreciate it, and want to hear where you go next. And now I'm going to be quiet, but I just want to recognize that the word sovereign has been used by individuals asserting certain things in good faith on their part, but in most cases, in good faith, but not necessarily fully comprehending what it is they are asserting. So please continue.
All right. So I'm just going to go into the next part of that, the definition of sovereignty, and that is there's 3 aspects that we have in our consciousness, and that is the thoughts, emotions, and actions. And you can look at those 3 aspects of our consciousness being reflective of the 3 parts of our brain. So actions, you could connect with the lizard brain, like the brain stem, the primitive part, the fight, flight, freeze response.
Sure.
That's the actions. That's that component, because everything's about trinities. Once you understand how power structures work, it's always in 3s. And it's because of these 3 aspects of our brain. And then you've got the center piece, the center part of our brain, which is the emotional center. And then you've got the frontal cortex, which is the thinking part. So those 3 aspects, when they're in alignment, that's when one is sovereign. Now, this Bill of Rights that I'm talking about here, the one that was written by a fiction, right? So you need to understand that government, if you understand what the purpose of government is, then you'll know that how the whole thing's been subverted to work against us. Government is just an administrative body, a fictional invention in the mind of man, just to organise how we are going to deliver services, how we're going to organise our labour, infrastructure, and extract resources. That's it. That's its entire purpose. Just like if you had a tribe living somewhere, and they needed to accumulate resources over winter, well, how are they going to organise that? Some people are going to need to come together and form some kind of body and make decisions, for that purpose. They didn't make decisions on what the people were or weren't allowed to do, but just how they were going to do things that were actually going to advance the quality of the life of those, people that they were working with and they lived amongst. Yep. That's pretty much all government was designed for. Now, if you think about that, how do they have any grant of authority in the natural order of things if they're not there to interpret natural law? They are just there to do a function. Now, how do they get to now jump into the function of granting us privileges and benefits? Like, we are the supreme. So how can they do that? That is an act of treason. So that Bill of Rights is an actual act of treason. And if you know what treason is, it's the usurpation of one's sovereignty. It's the attempt to gain authority over the creator. So we are the creator of government, and the government gets authority over us. That doesn't make sense, but two, it's an act of treason, right? So you can think about anything you created. How does it now have authority over you? Right? That doesn't follow in the natural order of things.
So can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
The natural order of things, and we're saying that is a treason. That is a treason under what law? Because this is where Magna Carta 1215 comes in.
Correct. And it's really important we say that number 1215.
Yeah.
It's very, very important. Not 1297 or just not Magna Carta. It needs to be 1215 because there are fraudulent versions created to do the same thing. And that is to confuse
hang
us
on just
so
a
that
second.
we don't align our three aspects of our consciousness.
Yeah, hang on just a second. Because before we get there, you opened something up here with treason, and this is a betrayal.
Yes.
Of a natural order. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So I'd like to ask you if you agree with a couple of definitions that I have here for some of the people that have participated in these treasons. And here is why. By their description in various places. You have many ministers in Europe, and whether it be a prime minister or a minister in a parliament, so on and so forth.
Sure.
The word minister is used a lot. In America, the word representative is used a lot. Okay? And I know we have senators and we have so on and so forth, but you'll always find the word representing. So, anyway, minister, first of all, let's begin with that term. A minister is someone who is a servant. Okay? Now, why do I make a big point of this? Trained as a minister for spiritual purposes, this is my absolute go-to on all things. I am there to serve in that capacity. That is what I'm there to do. Not to implement my belief system. Not to, really, this is the truth of it, not to cause someone to do anything that is based on my will. I am there to serve someone as a minister. Now, spiritually or legally, I'm thinking that word kind of carries the same meaning. You're supposed to be a servant. Okay? And if you are a representative, and I just, tell me I'm wrong if that's what you hear, and help me understand this. If you are a representative, as we have many representatives, okay, and we could even get into the word governor too, but let's not. Representatives. If they are there to represent you, then that means that they should, in some way, be a facsimile of who you are. That is the most basic way to understand. If something is there to represent something, it is there to hold its place. It is there to be in that space where this thing could not necessarily be. Even if you have a model of a city, you have a small building which is meant to represent something that you couldn't possibly put on your tabletop, right? But it's there to take the place of that thing in that scenario. So when you're talking about a violation of, the circumstance, not only are you talking about a situation where natural law is being defied, but also individuals who have usually taken an oath to be a representative or a minister, they are not acting in good faith because they are not simply serving, they are not simply representing, they are doing other things. So is this an inaccurate portrayal of the problem here when we're talking about the individuals? And let's get down to, okay, here's the crime, and here is how someone is violating their natural position in the order of things. Because if someone was selected to be a minister or selected to be a representative, and they did that job on someone's behalf, this would be a fair thing, even in natural law, would it not?
Can I just throw something in here before you get in, Fitz? The first thing I would say about that is that the representative that the people elect and send to whatever building we want to call it, Parliament, Congress, whatever, to represent us, the people, as soon as they get there, they are given a 1 week sort of walk around and tour of the place, and then everybody has a photo opportunity as they swear an oath to the nation, supposedly. But that oath that they're swearing isn't to the people, it is to the corporation. And we, the people, don't recognise that. And so when you say things like minister is to serve, they are correctly named. They are serving. They're just not serving the people. They are serving the corporation. Am I right about that, Fitz?
Yeah. Look, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit more, because this is where the legal system and the legalese is part of the whole structure. So why they created the legal system was to use the same words that we use in everyday English, but give them a whole different level of meaning. That's why you need a law degree, which is not really law, it's just a legal. And you need to go for 4 years or however long it is to understand exactly how they've redefined the same words you and I use in our day-to-day language, but they've redefined them. So the word represent is that. It is to represent you. Not represent, but represent. So they're presenting you as something else now, and not what you believe it is. That's how it's really used. That's what the whole, like I said, legal system is a mental construct. It's a mind-controlled construct to actually cloak the crimes that they're committing. And this was very well worked out centuries ago. This isn't new. It's just we are just catching up now because life has become that full on and that extreme that we're motivated to start looking. But before that, we're too comfortable, so we just went along with whatever we were told. Right. But now it's just too much in your face that now people are starting to look.
Okay,
so now we're starting to uncover the true meaning, the dual meaning, right? And that's why they created the legal system, because as soon as you, like you said earlier, Chuck, you go in their fake courts, as soon as you go in there, you are being represented as a deaf, dumb mute.
Yes. Well, and see, that's the interesting thing. That's the interesting thing about where you're bringing this up again and clarifying, and I appreciate it. You're being represented. True. And here's the thing, and the major violation in my mind, maybe I'm stuck on this, is that even if you are representing something, let's take it outside of all this for a second, and I love music, okay? You're representing a song. You are doing a cover tune, they call it, Generally speaking, you can recognize it, though, as it's a representation of the thing that came before. You see people copy pieces of artwork, right? Whether they do a sketch of a Mickey Mouse online or whatever, you see it and you say, well, that's Mickey Mouse. It's not a good Mickey Mouse, but it's a Mickey Mouse. You know what I mean? You see somebody sketch a tree. They're representing a tree in their artwork. It's usually, I know there's different disciplines where, there's cubism and all this, but point is that generally speaking, it is easily understood as a representation when it's recognizable to the presentation. So I guess I'm kind of stuck on that this is the biggest dishonesty. And of course, Carl just laid out exactly how dishonest it is. You are to represent the will of the people because you were elected, and the word elected is kind of difficult to parse also.
Yeah.
But if you were elected, in general common tongue, then you are there to represent the will of the people. That's the understood concept. But as Carl said, the way things should work and the way they do work might be two different things. So you're explaining that this is all actually built into the legal fiction. Okay, because again, it is the legal society and system that is representing natural law, isn't it? In a way that causes it to go sideways, right?
It's not so much representing natural law, because you can't do that. Like that, natural law is self-evident. It's not something you can make up. What it does is it obscures your consciousness. That's what it's to do, because they're using words you recognize, but they have a whole secret meaning to them. So it's like a secret society that gets together and they know the meaning, but you don't. You believe the meaning they're using in those words are the ones you've come to understand through the dictionary, right? But that's not what they're doing. It's like a whole production that's happening underneath that you can't see. So it's like a magic trick. That's what's happening. It's like sorcery. They use words as a type of sorcery. And so you're being represented as something you have never agreed to, that you're not even aware of. So I wouldn't even say that that's anything like how you see the word represent. It's not like a remake or something like that. It's a total inversion. You need to understand that's the level at which it's working. They're inverting reality. That's what the legal system is there to do. Okay, it's to take that which is natural and invert it.
Absolutely. Okay, so just as a side note here, you realize I'm asking certain questions to incite certain reactions to get certain information here. Okay,
sure.
This is not. I am really enjoying this. So by all means, Carl, I don't know where we're going next because I did not get a preview of this presentation, but this is really great. Please continue.
So before we can fully understand Magna Carta 1215, we have to understand the words sovereignty, sovereign, reign, and the other words that are used in Magna Carta 1215. And I guess the question that most people who are listening now are going to be asking, well, look, we've said an awful lot of words over the last however long we've been talking. You haven't presented anything remotely like a solution or a way to it. Well, the Magna Carta 1215 is the solution. People will argue that something written, 800 years ago has no relevance today. This isn't about passing laws about which side of the road you should drive on or how fast you should drive. This is a framework for our human rights. And if we follow it and the articles laid out in it, which we will learn through Fitz now, and I'd like to get to Fitz, one of the central pillar of Magna Carta 1215 is the justice system, trial by jury. And this is what people are worried about. If the world were to break down tomorrow and for some reason Magna Carta 1215 came back in and had all the rights in the world, what would happen to our criminals? What would happen to our laws? How would, what court do we go to? Who's going to be sitting there? These are the questions that I get asked a great deal. So, Fitz, can we touch on Magna Carta 1215 and the framework and get towards Article 61?
Yeah, so just two more pieces of info and then we can do that, because these are really critical. Because I can't explain it until there's two other pieces. So if you can bring up the consciousness slide, the one about consciousness. Okay. So consciousness is basically our access point into natural law.
Okay.
So if you can see what it says there, like how the etymology of the word comes from con, which is the Latin prefix for together or with, and science, which is derived from the Latin verb sciere, meaning to be aware of, or to learn or to know. So it's science. So conscience is the knowledge of the actions that are in the service of the preservation, enrichment, and advancement of life. So that is, we inherently have that knowledge. No one can teach us that. We don't need to go to school to learn that. We all know that. That comes imprinted in us. So the Magna Carta is man's best interpretation of natural law through the conduit of the conscience.
Right.
That's why I needed to bring that slide up, because that's what it is. It was how man interpreted natural law through its conscience into the physical realm, which is where our senses are. So that's how the Magna Carta came to be. It used that intelligence that we are imprinted with, which is access to our understanding of natural law through the conscience. And so then if we can bring up the common law slide, we'll drop it in, because it's all connected to common law. And the reason why it's called common law is because we are bound all by the same thing, and that's why it's common. So pretty much repeated what I just said. Man's best interpretation of natural law into the physical realm through the use of the conscience as the conduit. So it captures the shared reality of our intuitive sense of justice and injustice, which is permanent and self-evident. So a really good way to explain that is if you think about a 2-year-old when they have the terrible twos and they start tantruming, that's all that is that child has a built-in understanding of when its needs for choice are met or not met. And the severity of that tantrum is a reaction to how severely out of alignment those actions are to removing their choice for decision away from them.
Right.
The more precious and sacred something was that they wanted, the bigger the tantrum. And we never stop being like that. We just have different ways of expressing that tantrum. But that never changes. No matter what generation, it's always the same. So there's a permanence to it. That's why it's called law, because it doesn't change. We always have those reactions when our needs for choice are taken from us. And rights are pretty much just a way to make sure, another word for affirming that we have an inbuilt need for choice, to decide for ourselves, which is self-govern. Just like you decided what you were going to have for breakfast, what underpants you put on, what clothing you put on, how you know how to tie your own shoelaces. How did you decide which order you were going to do all those things? They're all methods of self-governing. So we do it already on a day-to-day basis. All the Magna Carta did is it just enshrined it at the community level, at the macro level, to make sure that none of those individual choices are taken from us, that they are enshrined. Because we know there are always people who are going to want to do that. And so we need to have a system by which that is protected. And so that's what the Magna Carta was, pretty much just a law to do with our liberties being enshrined. Because
but when you say the Magna Carta, you mean Magna Carta 1215?
Yes, correct. Thanks for pulling up on that. I've taught you well then, haven't I?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you something else here really quickly, just to clarify for the listener. When you described the Latin word and the root of it being about knowledge, it is not just knowledge. It is that implied in that term, actually in the Latin, because I know my Latin pretty well, is that it is intimate knowledge. It is not just that you are aware of it or you have observed it. It is a very closely experienced knowledge that you were referring to there in your definition of consciousness.
I love that you added that depth to it.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to make that clear because there are various words for knowledge in the Latin language that could be used there, and one could say it's passable one way or another, but fact is, studied Latin fairly extensively, and just happen to know that is, in particular in English, you would say that it is intimate knowledge, and not just...
I love that you added that, so I appreciate that, Chuck.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, go for it. So common law basically comes from that, now that Chuck's added that extra dimension to it, that intimate experience of knowing, what is just and what is unjust. And that's what the 1215 Magna Carta was set up to do, because there was a history of taking those common law traditions and taking them away from the people. And so they never had an enshrined document that now could be used as evidence that this is what the people agreed they want to live by. The rules they already had in place, they needed to have some kind of document. They never had a really enshrined, documented version of it. So this way, they could prove this is what they want. That's what it was there to do.
And the people got to this point because they had a cruel king. Is that the case?
Right. Yes. They basically, the monarch, what most people don't understand is the word monarch comes from two words, mono and arche. Mono means soul, and archon is ruler. And so as soon as they put that term monarch on that job title, that changed the whole way it was used. And that wasn't an accident. That was on purpose. Remember, words mean things. Where really the monarch is just an office holder of the office of sovereign. So what that means is the people are sovereign, and they create a trust, and that is what the office holder of sovereign is there to uphold, hold it in trust. And so that means all their assets, they actually have some way to actually utilize those assets that the people belong to the people in a way that's meant to be in service of the people, so to advance the quality of their life. That's what the whole role was designed for, and that was usurped. Because those power grabbers that are behind the scenes that you don't see, that work in the shadows, they took something that man created, because that's how it always works. They take what we create and they invert it, and then they invert our consciousness so we're not aware they've done it. So this is all carefully planned out. It's not just incidental. It requires very careful, methodical, strategic planning to be able to do that, to strip our consciousness away from what we inherently know and we have an intimate knowledge of. And that's what they did. And the Magna Carta was put there to Act 1215, should I say. Thank you again for it. Now, I've always got you telling me that, so it's the inversion of what I was doing with you. The 1215 Magna Carta was put there for that, so that people could never, ever forget. But as again, the power-hungry people, they made sure that they got what they wanted, and the people did forget, because they set about obscuring that from their consciousness. And so to get to what you were asking me earlier about that whole trial by jury system, that was the mechanism that was going to be there in the physical realm that demonstrated people's supremacy and showed it in real time how it works, that the government could never, ever take over that which created it. And so that's what the 1215 Magna Carta, that's a real holistic justice system that they put together to make sure that king, who was not really a king, they're just someone with a job, that has a coronation oath, and the coronation oath is their job contract. And if they breach that contract, they're out of a job. And that's what that 1215 Magna Carta asserted. As soon as you breach your job contract, you're out of a job. And so that's what it's there to do. And it had a seal put on it, and the seal means it exists in perpetuity. Every other single office holder of sovereign, which we call a monarch, they are bound to those same conditions that were put down into that constitution, which is what an actual constitution is. It's what the rules that the people already live by, that they've just enshrined in a document. They wrote it, no one else. As soon as you're acting in a capacity that is not you as a man or woman, you don't have rights the same way as a man or woman does, because you are a fictionally created entity. Okay. You are just in the service of the people. So you cannot write a constitution. That is not your function.
Right. Two things here. One, we're at about the 1 hour mark, and I usually like to take a break here just to give us time to collect our thoughts. And I would like to do that, but I'd also like to have you sort of end this hour by asking you a question, which I feel silly about asking. Because as I told Carl last night, my exposure to the Magna Carta, and I've looked at it, and I am not saying 1215 when I say it, because my exposure is not simply to the 1215 document. When it was shown to me and basically described as, this is the foundation of all law, nothing more to see here, pretty much. Okay, that was the way it was shown to me in school.
Yep, me too.
And quite frankly, here's the big question, though. I understood at that time that this was something that the king authorized. And therefore, if it is under this, see, again, this is very weird when you get into royalty, those that are the grand sovereigns, it seems, in certain systems and all that. What is the basis for this document that makes it special above any other decree or, I mean, I know this is not going to be a short answer, but a basic idea here. If somebody like me, again, the American who, by the way, there's a whole bunch of misleading things when it comes to this, because they usually tell us, well, the separation from the United Kingdom as it was, and we turned against the the unfair and cruel prince and all of that, and the legend, the American pride that comes in here. Again, something I always questioned. Here's the thing. This is a foundational document that comes from that system. In my mind, because that's the way it was sort of presented to me. But I'm re-examining this now. So how is it that we square that? I mean, is this not something that comes from that, system where there is this Well, royal rulers over there.
Royal hierarchy, I think, is the word you're looking for, and hereditary ruler is,
Yes.
it gets passed down, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Magna Carta 1215 specifically outlaws the job of the sovereign or the monarch being handed down to their family. Think of it like your job, Chuck. I don't know how many kids you've got, but would you hand them over your radio station if you owned it? If you were a lawyer, would your kid automatically inherit your lawyer practice and be practicing law on your behalf? If you were a doctor, is your kid automatically qualify for your job when you pass on?
Oh, no.
Right. So literally, the sovereign was appointed by the people in Magna Carta 1215. It is an appointed position, a job. And nowhere in Magna Carta 1215 does it specify that you get to keep the job for perpetuity. So it doesn't fall into a family line. That would lead to control. And as Fitz was saying earlier, if the people under Magna Carta 1215 had a sovereign that wasn't protecting the people and wasn't making decisions that were moving the people forward, doing the best thing by the people, then they could remove that sovereign. There was a technique, and that's why we'll get to Article 61. There is a technique to lawfully and peacefully remove that sovereign and insert a sovereign who is going to enforce the will of the people and follow the laws of Magna Carta 1215. Am I right with that, Fitz?
Oh, beautifully put. I just wanted to make one adjustment. Otherwise, it's bang on. So the only adjustment is that we need to be careful how we use that word sovereign. And so there is no such thing as the sovereign. That's an outright fallacy. That doesn't exist. What exists is an office of sovereign. So that's entirely different. So when you say the sovereign, it's like someone has this divine capacity to be above others. That doesn't exist. So they are an office holder of the office of sovereign. So they are someone who are elected. They're meant to be someone of high integrity that people trust to elect into that role, which is still an employee. They just happen to occupy the highest office in the land. Now, in America, you have what's called the presidency. It's the same thing. System's the same. It's just got a different title.
I know quite often I've said it's the world that I think should be. It is the world that I know should be. But how we get there and how we get others to not just believe in the possibility but know it as well. This is the crux of the situation. This is the reality that is and has been confounded by many different constructs. And, who knows? Maybe in the next week or so we'll also talk about the Matrix again and a few other things. But this is where things should be. This is what we were talking about all those times with natural rights. And I got very frustrated with people that would not elaborate further about these things, but we are definitely getting a serious masterclass tonight on natural rights, the meaning of words, the understanding of what is and what should be, quite frankly. So with that, back to you, Carl. Where are we going from here? And I will give plenty of show notes and stuff like this, so you guys will be able to go look up this information and learn more for yourselves. Plus, I want to bring these two gentlemen back on and continue this conversation on another day, hopefully with plenty of feedback and input from you, the listener. So go ahead, Carl.
Would love that, Chuck. We would love to hear from the listeners. If they've got questions that they have about what we've been talking about so far, then certainly we would love to answer them for you and offer you a bit of help in going out to find those answers yourself, because at the end of the day, this is as much a self-learning process as it is a teaching process, on behalf of Fitz at the moment, because he's certainly the teacher. But it is up to every one of us as individuals to learn what he is teaching, because unless we learn it, we do not understand what our rights are. We do not fully understand what a constitution is and how a constitution is by the people, for the people, to protect the people, and within it, it has security mechanisms to protect us from being overrun by government. And I think one of the big issues that we're going to face in the coming weeks and months is confusion over Magna Carta and which one is real. So at the moment, we are talking about Magna Carta 1215. You will hear stories about 4 or 5 other versions, might be more versions, years like 1225 and particularly 1297. They will say these are updates of the Constitution or the Magna Carta, because when they first wrote it, it wasn't quite right, things needed to be changed. A full understanding of Magna Carta 1215 will have you understand that the Magna Carta 1215 can't be changed by anybody except us, the people. No branch of government, no law can be created, no person can write a law and put it above us, be they the monarch or holding the office of sovereign. They cannot write a law that changes the Magna Carta 1215. There are protections inside 1215 that stop that from happening. However, other churches get involved, other popes get involved, other governments get involved, and that's where these rewrites have come about. Interestingly, you will find progressively that the rights afforded to us in Magna Carta 1215 have been repealed or hidden from us in other rewrites, particularly 1297, where I think Article 61 in the most part is missing completely. Is that right, Fitz?
Yeah, so they're basically the same as the Bill of Rights. They just make it seem like it's the legitimate thing, but while you're looking over here, where you're not looking is where they're taking away where the real power is. So yes, that's correct. They take away what's really going to give you a lived experience of your actual supremacy over government. They took that away. And if you agree to it, then as soon as you agree to it, then that's where they've got you. And that's what's happened. And so what they did in 1297 is they created a statute version. So what's a statute, right? That's a statute, a false idol. So once you understand what words mean, you can see where the deceptions come from. So that's a really big thing to understand what I just said there. Okay. So
once again,
statute version. A statute comes from the word statue, and a statue is a false idol. So that's telling you they've created a false replica, like a fake.
Yeah.
That's what the 1297 is, and it's there to take to get you to agree to being the fiction that's inside that piece of document, because then you're government property. As soon as you agree to that, you are government property.
And once again, people think the word statute, just the word statute, holds some authority.
Yeah,
but
correct.
It doesn't.
It's just an act of Parliament. That's all it is. And what's an act, right? It's a theatre production. So Parliament just puts on theatre productions. Remember how you've heard that term that politics is Hollywood for ugly people?
Yes.
You would have heard that term before? Well, that's probably a bit more of elaboration on where that come from. So they are just putting on acts all the time. All those arguments they have inside, you see them all having a go at each other. It's a theatre production. That's all it is. That's what they're there to do.
So Australia recently has been seen in the news to be rolling out their version of the Magna Carta, version 1297, which was presented to us many, many years ago by another nation. It's just been restored and about to be put back on display in our House of Parliament. That would lead us to believe then that everything in Australia is running off Magna Carta 1297, which excludes the mechanisms to protect the people, the security clauses particularly.
Yes, so that's where we were coming from before. We were going to lead into Article 61 and how that is the way that the people can now take away the monarch, whoever we've had elected into office, how that office then gets vacated. And when that's the case, then every single government that monarch sits above, they must be dissolved. That's the entire structure. And then, like you said, then we need to go into the process of actually electing a new one, and then new representatives, of Her Majesty, which is what we call her now, but of the office of sovereign, they need to be elected as well. So we've never had that process, yet Article 61 was invoked on March 2001, or March 23, 2001, and now we just have criminal imposters standing in the place of what the majority of the people believe is their government, but they're not, they're actual criminal imposters.
So when we say when we say that Article 61 was invoked on the 23rd of March 2001, that's not just in Australia. That's every Commonwealth nation that's covered by Magna Carta 1225, including the United States of America.
Correct. So this is the part that's going to be really hard for most people to grab. We don't actually have our own constitutions.
1215, by the way. You said 1225. You meant 1215.
Oh, beg your pardon. Beg your pardon. Yes. Thank you for catching me, Chuck.
No problem. I have...
That's good, Chuck. It means you understand what we need to be specific as well, so that's perfect.
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to be as specific as possible. And here's the thing. A quick question here, because I'm internalizing the meaning of things as we go. And, of course, the Magna Carta, again, Latin base phrase... it is to infer to something, to refer to something as a great charter, okay, because magna is a form of the word magnus or magnum, so on and so forth, and carta is a charter, okay. That's fair enough, but I got to tell you that many of the histories, as they are written online regarding this, and even talking about the 1215 document, state that the document was obtained. They literally use the word obtained from King John. On the consensus seems to be sometime in June of 2015. I mean, not 2015. Excuse me, of 1215. 1215. We'll get it. We'll get it eventually. In June of 1215, apparently this was obtained from King John. Now, the origin of this thing is important. Because, again, if it is a contract which is written between two individuals or two parties, that's one thing. If it is the Great Charter or the Grand Charter or the larger of the Charter, again, Magna, so it's a little confusing here, because if you have this Article 61 circumstance, that, I mean, does this mean that King John had something to do with authorship here? Who is the author?
Yeah.
And who is covered by this? These are the things you have to consider during any sort of legal notice or lawful notice, right?
Okay. Yeah. So I think the bit that we haven't covered so far is the bit you're alluding to is the barons. So Fitz, maybe we should have a bit of a discussion about how the barons came to King John and how the Magna Carta 1215 was born.
Okay. So, like I said, they had already a tradition in place. They just never had a document that was there so they could have it as evidence that was their tradition. So they just took it as, we have a common law tradition, and
you will.
Clear.
So that means you're not going to steal that bloke's fruit or that bloke's vegetables, and if you do, there will be punishment.
It's like a gentleman's agreement. We just know.
Yeah.
But it was never put down, right? So they realised that because they never put it down, that would have allowed King John to go well beyond the scope of the grant of authority that people gave him, because he's just an employee. He's not anything special. He doesn't have any divine right to rule. And he went into that space where he had the divine right to rule, where he got to cut people's faces into pieces and chop their ears off and their noses, and take their lands. He just got to do things that are not even anywhere close to what he was.
A tyrant in the true sense of the word.
Absolutely. And so what the barons did, they were just freeholders of land. That's all baron means. And they're the ones who had had a lot of power. And so what they did is it got so extreme that they said, we can't have this anymore. So they organised a meeting after they seized London to show them they meant business. And they said, okay, if you want to keep your job, because that's all it is, it's a job. If you want to keep it, we're going to need to create a document that you can't pretend you don't know about. And you're going to need to be party of it. If you don't want to keep your job, that's fine. You won't have a job. We will find someone else. But if you do, you're going to need to be party to this agreement. And they laid down the terms of that agreement because they were acting for the people. And that's why they put in the security clause, which is Article 61, because there's a history of, the office holder of sovereign going past their grant of authority. And usually that was because of the whole Vatican system that was running at the time. That they would always keep trying usurping the British,
Yes.
the whole Commonwealth, the British Empire, because they had control of the seas, and so they wanted that wealth and that control. And so the quickest way to do it was to get control of the office holder of sovereign and have them work for him. And so this was a way to secure that that would never happen. And so that's what that all was about, was just making sure that if they wanted to keep their job, this is the agreement by which their job is going to be theirs. And if they breach any aspect of that agreement, that's why it's a great charter. And I just want to add that just because a word means something specifically in a language, it never translates directly just by saying that word only, because every language has a spirit in which the word is meant. So in the spirit of what the Magna Carta means in English, it's the Great Charter of Liberties. Mm-hmm. So that's very important to make that distinction. Because if you just say Great Charter of what? Right? So in the spirit of the language by which it was meant, as it translates in English, it's Great Charter of Liberties. So another way is to say a law based around liberties that enshrines it. So
does that explain the link a bit better, Chuck?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going for absolute clarity here because I want this to be, crystal clear as best we can make it. And so far, I'm getting some feedback that says you guys are doing an amazing job, by the way. And, of course, Fitzroy just addressed a question before I even got to ask it, which was sent to me via Skype and in the chat room, looks like. So, very good. Thank you. Anyway, I'll again, please continue.
So basically, it was basically a way for the king to go back in his box, so to speak. And he obviously, like you hear a lot of stories about he'd done under duress. Well, which tyrant is going to go, oh, yeah, you know what, now that I've done that, I was a bit of a naughty boy and I'm happy just to pull my head in and carry on the way you want me to be. No tyrant's going to do that. That's not part of their psychopathy. So, of course, he's going to say it's under duress. Right? It's just like if you bring a criminal to stand trial for their crimes. Are they going to be happy they're there? Are they going to be jumping for joy? It's the same thing. So anyone who uses that argument that he was under duress, that therefore it's invalid, they don't understand how law works. They're just totally oblivious to it. So that argument's down the toilet, right? That doesn't make any sense. It's because he is an office holder of sovereign. He's a man working in a capacity. He is employed. So he doesn't get to do anything outside of what the agreement of his employment is. It's like if you go to your employer and say, you know how we had this contract? Well, guess what? I'm changing it, and you don't get to do anything about it. That's pretty much what that Magna Carta is to say, no, this is your job contract, and this is how you will conduct yourself while you're holding this office. If you do anything outside of the terms of this, what's here, you are out of your office. And then you are prosecuted as a man for the crimes you've committed, that breach the people's sovereignty. So that's what that was. And so the reason why they had to put that mechanism in is because they knew from history that it's going to keep getting usurped, and which is what did happen. So then they knew that. So the criminals, the Vatican and whoever else you want to throw into there, the bloodline families, they went about trying to make sure that was invalidated. And they came up with a whole bunch of hodgepodge stories. And they went as far as King Edward now saying that the king, who is just a man, right, they have no special powers, right, who's an employee, right, who took an oath, which is to serve the people. Now this king can all of a sudden create a constitution. How do they do that? Right? If you believe that that's true, then you must believe that you're a slave. It's as simple as that. That's what it comes down to. To believe that someone else can grant you rights, that's saying that you believe you were born here to be a slave and you are lesser of a being.
Yeah, lesser than that person. Yep.
Yes. And so that's the whole fiction that they created to make you believe that. And that's done through words like monarch, through, bloodline, like through royalty, throne, those kind of words. There's no such thing. That's just stuff they invented for the theatre to subvert your consciousness. All right. So that's how they did it. They subvert it through this idolatry and imagery and, all these false idol stuff. The very thing that people who believe in the Bible and that we talk about, yet they fall for these things called statutes, which is the same thing. And this is how people's, consciousness gets subverted, is because they don't have the real true meaning of the words that are used. And so one of the real important words that we need to clarify is rule of law. Now, I recently heard General Flynn speaking about that, but I never heard him define it. And so these are the really, really important things that we need to really be clear about, is that if someone says a word, and if they're in a position that makes them look like they're an authority, if they're not defining that word, needs to trip up your suspicions straight away. And that's why it's really important that we define what the rule of law means. So then when you hear anyone else say that, then you can work out, are they really speaking about this, or are they speaking about some other version that I don't know about? So
That's
I don't know
a very important point.
If you've got that actual slide up anywhere in your list there, I hope I sent it to you in the last email.
Which one?
The rule of law. I don't know if I gave you a slide about the rule of law.
I'm sure you've.
But if you don't, I've got one. So I'll just read it off that while you're looking. So the rule of law means that the law rules. So it refers to a constitutional framework. Now, remember what we said a constitution is? It's a set of rules that the people already live by in their day-to-day life. They've tested it.
Yep. Oh, no. Don't tell me I've dropped out.
To cooperate under a system of equity. Right. So what does equity mean, right? We need to distinguish that between equality. So an equity is where we get the same access to resources, employment, infrastructure that's going to give us the same quality of life as our neighbour. Now, some of us will need less access, and some of us will need more. But the bottom line is that it needs to give us the same quality of life. That's what the real term equity means. So if you can piece all that together, the rule of law is about delivering a system of equity to all of us. So then we can have the same quality of life. And so therefore it's about equity will prevail. And each country has set that up, was supposed to set that up, should I say. I'm not saying they have, because reality shows us if we had had that set up, we wouldn't be going through this COVID stuff right now. So if that was correctly set up, none of this would exist. We would be in charge, and we would never put ourselves into wars. We would never put ourselves into this unfair advantage where some people have more wealth than they'll ever be able to spend or use, and others can't even scratch two pieces of bread together, right? We'd never set that up for ourselves. We just never would. We never would have had a system of child slave labour. We never would have done that. We never would have had, all these pornography hubs and all this kind of stuff that happens. We wouldn't torture ourselves like that, So you really got to think about how people even migrated to different countries, right? How did that work? If they were living such a wonderful life, would they ever left those countries? No. So why did things deteriorate? Because people weren't in charge of government. That knowledge was taken from them. They came to believe that they're below government. And that's a very deliberate thing. If you are running a power hierarchy structure, the only way to support it is to make people believe they are lesser and someone is more superior. And that's what the whole purpose of government and politics is now. It's to get you to believe that. And that's why you have people walking around with masks on. There's no other reason that would happen if they truly knew who they were and how supreme they were. They would never cover their faces and stop themselves from breathing air, which they need, because the other part of their lungs exists outside of their body. And they need that second part to function. And they're putting a barricade in between the two. No sovereign would ever do that, because they would know their true self and what they require for the quality of their life. So why would they do something to impede the quality of their life? Why? Who would do that if they are fully conscious of who they are and that no one has the right to decide for them? It would never happen. And then we had a system in place, which was trial by jury, which enshrined the rule of law, because the law isn't the legal. It is not the legislation. It is that which we are bound to, that we cannot change. That is what the law is. And they are: do no harm, cause no loss, keep the peace, and commit no fraud. It's all those four. The 10 Commandments are all reduced into those four.
Yes. And
that is what the rule of law is, because those things are permanent. You know, if you do harm to someone else, that there will be consequences, and they are not going to be favourable to anybody. You know that if someone has a loss, that they have now been violated in some kind of way, and they are not whole. And we need to find a way to create restitution so they can become whole again. If there's a breach of the peace, we know what happens when someone's peace is breached. We all have an understanding of that. No one needs to educate us on that. Same thing with if there's been fraud committed, right? The whole legislative system is one massive fraud. It is one massive transgression of natural law. That's how they did it. That is how there is a massive disadvantage, that there are some people who have more than they'll ever need, and they could ever want. And there's too many people who have less than what they need. So there is no equity, and that can only be done through legislation. That is what government has been set up for now, and the past, I don't know how many hundreds of years. And so once you understand, and when people say the rule of law, if they don't give you a definition of it, they are subverting your consciousness. It's that simple. We are at a junction now in our lives that we can't pussyfoot around anymore and pretend like these people are here for our benefit. If they're not giving you definition, they're not here for your benefit. They're not here to contribute to your well-being. They are here to subvert your consciousness. Definition is everything. And if that's not being done, then all bets are off, and you need to go straight into suspicion. It's just that simple.
See, I find this interesting because it is spiritually sound across effectively all reasonable disciplines. And I, again, as I said at a certain other point, and I'm not trying to bring religion into this, but I must say that as someone who calls themselves a pagan for a reason, and by that, by the way, that just simply means common folk.
Yep.
Anyway, we have three basic pillars, which boil down those four that you just talked about pretty well. Because to not deceive, to not harm, okay, these are your restrictions. You do not deceive, you do not harm, all right? And you do not steal. It's just that simple. That does take care of your Ten Commandments and everything else, effectively. Because even with fraud, well, what is fraud after all? It is the attempt to gain by deception. So it's kind of covered by stealing and deceiving.
Yeah.
Okay, but what I'm saying is these things, although they may sound a bit different, are not. And that's why I understand this in a very multi-lateral sense. That natural law makes the most sense from a spiritual position, from a intellectual position, and from a one who cares about their own physical safety. This makes sense as well, does it not? So, kind of covers the three pillars of existence too, because your emotion and your spirit, these are very much intertwined. So we could call it the emotional center. We could say emotionally, intellectually, physically. All of this makes perfect sense. And you would wish to not do harm and not have harm done to you. So it works both ways. And all of this makes perfect sense. I mean, I know this sounds maybe redundant and rudimentary to some people, but these are the facts. It's very basic. I mean, or am I, talking out of the wrong side of my mouth, Carl? Go ahead.
They are very basic human rights.
Right.
And the fact that they have been perverted by others and have been hidden from us for so many years, Chuck, is what you're saying. It's hard for us to understand and comprehend exactly what's been done to us because words mean things and we have forgotten or had their true meaning hidden from many words. And that's why we've spent so much time understanding certain words in what we've talked about earlier. It is important that you understand the true meaning of the words that are being used. Otherwise, you think they're saying one thing when really they're saying something else, and it is to their benefit, not yours.
Now, gentlemen, I just need to cut in. I'm just sorry to interrupt, but I've just been given a message that I need to go pick up my son before daycare closes. So I apologise. I didn't know that was going to happen. So I'm hoping you can probably hold the reins for a little bit, but I'm going to have to skip out. I'm sorry, guys.
Sorry, mate. No worries.
Not an issue. Look, you've given us a ton of things to go over here, and I do mean these are some fairly heavy concepts. Go do what you have to do. Before we're done, though, Carl thought it would be extremely instructive because I know I cut him off last night when he started talking about this because I went, whoa, this is going to be a little deeper than we have time for. But Now let's get the full explanation, because there is a huge difference between Magna Carta 1215 and I think there's three others.
Yeah, at least three, Chuck. I think you'll probably find that there are two more that don't quite pass themselves off as Magna Cartas, but some people say they are.
Okay.
1225 and 1297 are the two that you're likely to hear the most about as people learn more about Magna Carta. And unfortunately, as we've discussed previously, people haven't been taught Magna Carta since we were at school. And even then, we were only basically taught the name and very little about it. You know, it was like, oh, yeah, this is the basis of all law everywhere, and move on. So it's important that people understand, and I hope in the previous time Fitzroy was able to explain exactly why Magna Carta 1215 is the only true non-fraudulent version of any Magna Carta anywhere. And the simple fact of it is that the Magna Carta 1215 was written by the people, for the people, and signed by the office holder of sovereign. It was then sealed, so it cannot be changed outside of the rules specified inside the Magna Carta for changing it. So any arm of government, as Fitzroy outlined, we the people are supreme. We appoint an office holder of sovereign. From there, everything else flows down. So government, legal, the executive arm are all subjugate to the people and the sovereign they have appointed. So if, for instance, you look at 1225 or you look at even 1216, they're talking about Pope Innocent III. He tried to weigh in and have some say on it, and they say he changed it then. Well, he did try and change it then, but the barons refused to let the Catholic Church have any say in it. And then this comes down to a fine point. Remember, this is an English document created by an English king with English barons. It goes to show just the power of the Vatican at the time, that they are able to wage that kind of war and that kind of power, if you like, within that particular sphere. Of course, Henry VIII later created the Church of England, and what power would any pope have over anything created under Church of England law? Absolutely none. But the fact of the matter is the pope is created by or elected to a position by other elected officials. We the people do not elect the Pope. In fact, we the people do not even elect the people that elect the Pope. We don't even elect your local priest. We don't have any say in that election process at all. The people have no say. So how does a Pope get to rewrite an article written by the people for the people when he is just one of us? He is a man born on the land like anybody else. He is no greater, no lesser than anybody else. He simply holds an office elected by a, very cozy little group of other men who've been elected by a bigger, cozier group of other men that none of us, the people, are allowed access to. So nothing written post 1215 can undo what was written in Magna Carta 1215, because the mechanism to do the change is within Magna Carta 1215. Any other rewrite that you see has that mechanism removed. And that mechanism is Article 61, and Chuck, that's a whole other 2 hours.
Right. No, I understand. It's just, and I do actually understand what it is that you're saying here. It's just, it's really remarkable because, again, you take certain things for granted. And why do you take them for granted? Because you've heard them so many times, or they were given to you as, well, this is just the way of the world. Yep. Quite often, this is one of the most difficult things to unlearn. Because, it is the perceptions that are granted to us by, and it's not the fault necessarily of our parents, but at the same time, they have been drawn into the very same thing by, guess who? Their parents.
As their parents were, and their parents before them, and their parents before them. This goes back centuries. Right. They've been pulling the wool over our eyes and having us believe. And look, we, as an Australian nation, and I suspect certainly there's more than one or two Americans like this, we are lazy at times. If somebody feeds us the information, instead of us going to have to look at it and find it ourselves, we will take the information that is fed to us. We won't go looking for it. People like Fitzroy and myself, and I suspect you, we go looking, because when we're given the information and something doesn't quite sound right, we want to know why. So we ask questions, we seek, and that's what the human race as a whole has had taken from it. I'm not saying they've lost the ability to do it, but when you look at the underprivileged in Africa, the only thing they are capable of seeking is their next meal. They have been oppressed so badly that the thought of any freedom, any natural law, any great benefit to them is completely surpassed by their need for food.
Well,
Nothing else.
I know it's not comparable, okay, but look, not everybody in America is fat and lazy because they can be. Quite frankly, and a lot of people think this in other parts of the world, and to some degree, I can understand why. It's what is shown to them. But the reality is that there are plenty of people here, I assure you, that are just as concerned about a way to gather their next meal as well. That this is what their time is consumed with, one way or another.
Yeah. Yep, here too, mate. Here too.
Upward mobility has been removed from the equation for a long time in the economic sphere, and by the way, that's a whole other discussion that I keep trying to have as well. That this is the design of the system. If you are in poverty here in the United States, I grant you it's not the same as being in the middle of the Ethiopian desert during a drought. But
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Your reality, poverty is poverty. It doesn't matter if you're doing it on a bitumen street or a dirt road. You're still poor.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's my point, is that I assure you there's a lot more people in that condition here than there is, living the lavish lifestyle and so on and so forth. So, what is their time consumed with? It is consumed with survival, and survival of their just like anywhere else. There's survival of themselves, their children, their loved ones, those that are part of their inner community, so to speak. And, of course, it is difficult to make time to look outside of anything other than what is in front of you. And I understand that, Many people criticize others, they're just, and I'll even be guilty of it on occasion where I'll say, somebody's just very dumb, and they wish to remain dumb. And some people do. This is true. I never make absolute statements, for I am not a Sith, joke. But the thing is that it's beyond that, where if you don't have the resource nor the time in the day to search out anything other than what is of your primary concern, and we all share these things as well. This is the thing to keep in mind, that no matter who we are or where we are, we all share the same very basic needs. We all share it's very trite and very 60s sounding, but we all are on the same planet, right?
Yeah.
We're all breathing the same air. Okay, it may differ a little bit region to region, but truth is we're sharing it. And I hearken back to, and I want to close with this kind of thought, because this is why this is very important to everyone. One of the most basic lessons that my father taught me, and I lost him very young, very early in my life, but one of the very basic lessons that he was able to impress upon me was, and it's very ethnic sounding, and, bear with me a moment. I'm Sicilian and Irish in my ancestry. So
I'm not messing with you.
Okay. Appreciate that. But being that I am Sicilian, he wanted me to understand that every man I see, and this is how he put it, so understand it's not very politically correct. He died in the 1970s, so get over it. Not you, Carl. I mean, anybody who's thinking to themselves, every man, don't you mean? No. This is how my father put it, okay? Every man you see, with the exception maybe maybe, of that Native American over there, they're all your brothers. You know why? Because as a Sicilian, we had every single people on the planet come through the island of Sicily at some point or another. Every culture is already in you. And this is the way you need to understand the world. That was my father's attitude.
It's a great attitude.
And he said, you know, of course, there was a bit of pride there because he didn't even recognize anything other than he was purely Sicilian, although, you know, and I'll tell you all the time, look, I'm definitely from Italy, but, you know, Italy is a construct as well. But the island of Sicily was a unique place, but it's not unique if you understand that we mostly don't even know our own histories well enough to know exactly how related to one another we are. And the best assumption, the smartest assumption, is that we are all related to one another in one way or another. We are part of, some people call it the human family.
Yep.
Some people say mankind. Whatever. It's irrelevant. We all have a hell of a lot more in common, Carl, than we have to differentiate ourselves from one another, regardless of whether it's skin color, language, anything else. We are all in need of the very same basic things.
Yep.
And we are all, guess what, really, truly meant to be subject to natural law.
Absolutely.
So, I don't know, Carl, anything you'd like to add in here at the end, but I wanted to kind of just end my thoughts on the night with that because this is the gradual explanation of a solution. I'm not criticizing, by the way. We have to do this slowly because
we do.
A lot to unlearn along the way while learning. So your final thoughts on at least tonight's presentation, and of course, I really do hope that we will get to do many more in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure Fitz will be involved. We're very excited to be able to share this with you, with anybody. It doesn't matter what country, where you are, what you've said about colour, faith, you know, the soul doesn't have a colour. The soul doesn't have slitty eyes. The soul doesn't have the things that we hang on other nations. Oh, you know, those people wear funny rags on their heads, or those other folks, you know, they wear funny beads or whatever. The soul doesn't see any of that. And the one commonality between every person on earth is we all have a soul. That is our inner strength. And that is essentially what Magna Carta 1215 protects and gives us rights to protect it from others who would take advantage. So if I have one message to leave your listeners with, those people who are in poverty or in hard times, the way out isn't with a gun. The way out isn't on the streets waving a flag or waving a sign or smashing a window. The way out is to learn about Magna Carta 1215. That is your power. That is all our power. And until we all recognize it and we join together, these bastards are going to keep doing this to us.
Very good. And the bottom line there, again, is that we just need to remember that we have a choice to embrace our natural rights. So there you go. Carl Oz-I, as I described him before, but Carl, and of course, big thanks to Fitzroy, who was with us also really doing the bulk of the instruction here tonight. But I assure you, you've done a good job as well, my friend.
Thanks, mate.
Anyways, guys, that's the end of the show for tonight, but we're going to revisit this, and like I said, your feedback will be helpful, you the listener, that is, because remember this, at all times, I'm merely Ocelli. All of you are indeed the effect. Good night.